I still remember Vanessa swirling her red wine as she sneered at my invitation. She told me not to bother them with my little school play because they had the Manhattan Elite Gala that night, urging me to just enjoy being a lowly teacher. My family laughed, oblivious. They did not know that 48 hours later, they would freeze seeing my face on every massive screen in Times Square, standing right next to the President of the United States. My name is Natalia Whitfield. To the outside world, specifically the high-octane, diamond-encrusted world my family inhabits, I am a 29-year-old failure who squandered a perfectly good Ivy League legacy to bang on tambourines with children who cannot speak. I work at Northern Light Academy. The name sounds prestigious, perhaps evoking images of a Swiss boarding school where the offspring of diplomats learn to ski and debate. But in reality, it is a converted brick building in a quiet district where we practice music therapy for children on the severe end of the autism spectrum. My days are not filled with board meetings or stock tickers, but with the breakthrough moment when a nonverbal 6-year-old finally makes eye contact because I played a C major chord that resonated with his heartbeat. I love my life, or at least, I try to love it enough to drown out the chorus of disappointment that waits for me every Sunday night at my parents' estate. My father and mother built a real estate empire that spans the entire East Coast. They speak in square footage and zoning laws. My brother, Julian, is a shark of a lawyer who bills $800 an hour and wears suits that cost more than my car. And then there is Vanessa, his wife. Vanessa is a senior editor at a fashion magazine that dictates what the wealthy should wear to brunch. She is beautiful, sharp, and about as warm as a marble countertop in midwinter. Together, they form a phalanx of success that I have never been able to breach. This particular Sunday was supposed to be different. In my oversized tote bag, tucked between sheet music and a stress ball, was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It had arrived at my apartment 2 days prior, heavy and textured like linen. The return address was embossed in gold leaf, displaying the seal of the National Endowment for the Arts. Sitting right next to the seal of the White House, I had opened it with trembling hands, reading the letter 3 times to ensure I was not hallucinating. I had been selected as the Cultural Ambassador of Faith of the Year, a recognition for my innovative work in nonverbal communication through melody. I sat at the long mahogany dining table, the silence punctuated only by the scraping of silver knives against fine china. The air smelled of rosemary and expensive red wine. I waited for a lull in the conversation, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I have some news," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. My mother did not look up from her plate. "If it is about your rent, Natalia, your father and I agreed that at 29, you really should be managing your own finances better." "It is not about money," I said, forcing a smile. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. "I received this. It is an invitation to an award ceremony in DRC next weekend. I wanted to invite you all. It is a big deal to me." I began to slide the envelope across the polished wood toward my father, but Vanessa's manicured hand intercepted it before it could reach him. She did not open it. She just held it, weighing it, before placing it down next to her wine glass. "Oh, speaking of next weekend," Vanessa cut in, her voice bright and piercing, completely ignoring my gesture. "Julian, did you tell them? We finally secured the VIP table for the Manhattan Elite Gala. Do you have any idea how hard those tickets were to get? I had to pull strings with 3 different designers." My father's eyes lit up, the interest immediate and genuine. "The Elite Gala? Isn't Arthur Sterling rumored to be making an appearance there? That man is a ghost. If you can get 5 minutes with him, Julian, it could mean the merger goes through." "Exactly," Julian said, loosening his tie with a self-satisfied smirk. "It is the event of the season. Everyone who matters will be there. We are talking about senators, tech moguls, the whole A-list." I sat there, my hands still hovering in the space where I had offered my invitation. They were talking over me, around me, as if I were a piece of furniture. "Excuse me," I said, a little louder this time. "The ceremony I mentioned? It is on the same night." Vanessa turned her head slowly, her eyes sweeping over me with a mix of pity and annoyance. She finally deigned to look at the envelope she had hijacked. She flipped it open. Not with reverence, but with the casual indifference one applies to a utility bill. She scanned the elegant calligraphy. National Endowment, Education, Children. She mumbled the keywords, her lip curling slightly. She dropped the heavy card back onto the table. It landed near her plate, and a single drop of the dark bordelaise sauce from her roast beef splattered onto the pristine white corner of the invitation. My stomach dropped. Natalia, honey, Vanessa sighed, tilting her head. It is sweet, really, but look at this. It is a participation trophy for teachers. Ambassador of Faith? It sounds like something they give out at a Sunday school picnic. It is a national award, I said, my voice tightening. From the White House. It is for looking after children, Natalia. Vanessa laughed, a sharp, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. I know you love your little babysitting job, and I am sure the parents are very grateful you keep their kids occupied. But please, do not disturb us with these local school plays. We have the Manhattan Elite Gala. We are going to be networking with billionaires. You just enjoy being a lowly teacher. I looked at my brother, waiting for him to defend me. Julian just took a sip of his wine and shrugged. She is right. Nat, you have to be realistic. The Elite Gala is a career-making environment. We cannot skip it to watch you get a plaque in some drafty auditorium. Why do you always have to be so dramatic about your hobby? It is not a hobby, I whispered. It is my career. My father set his knife down with a clatter. A career is something that builds equity. Natalia, a career is something that commands respect. We have indulged in this artistic phase of yours for a decade. Do not expect us to applaud every time you get a gold star for effort. My mother simply shook her head, focusing on cutting her meat into precise, geometric shapes. We just want you to do something substantial. Darling, like Vanessa. The silence that followed was suffocating. I looked at the invitation. The sauce stain was soaking into the heavy paper, spreading like a bruise over the embossed seal. It was a perfect metaphor for my place in this family. Anything I achieved, anything that was pure and mine, they would inevitably tarnish with their carelessness. I realized then that no matter what I did, to them, I would always be the girl playing pretend. I would always be the lowly teacher who did not understand the real world of money and power. I reached out and took the invitation back. I did not wipe the sauce off. I did not raise my voice or throw my wine in Vanessa's face. Much as I wanted to, I simply folded the envelope and placed it back into my tote bag. Okay, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Okay, what? Julian asked, annoyed that the mood had been dampened. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The legs scraped harsh and loud against the floor. Okay, if that is how you feel. I looked at Vanessa, who was already back to checking her reflection in her spoon. I looked at my parents, who were relieved the awkward topic was over. I will go alone, I said. And without waiting for dessert, or for permission, or for a goodbye that would never come. I walked out of the dining room, leaving the warmth of the chandelier for the cold night air, clutching the only thing that proved I mattered. The morning sun at Northern Light Academy always hits the keys of my Steinway in a way that makes the dust motes dance like tiny suspended galaxies. This is my sanctuary. Here, the air does not smell of old money and judgment. It smells of floor wax and possibility. I sat on the bench next to Leo, a 7-year-old boy who had not spoken a single word since birth. His world was a fortress of silence, impenetrable to doctors and therapists. But when I played a soft, melancholic minor third, his hand would twitch. When I resolved it into a major chord, his breathing would sync with mine. We were having a conversation. It was invisible, weightless, and more profound than any contract my brother had ever signed. There is no violence here, no boardroom aggression. There is only patience. My job requires the kind of endurance that does not roar but whispers. Waiting hours for a single smile, a single tap of a finger. It stands in stark contrast to the life I was bred for. I grew up in a world where time was money. But here, time is the only currency that matters, and we spend it lavishly on connection. I often think back to the day I told my father I was changing my major from business law to music therapy. He looked at me as if I had announced I was joining a circus to shovel elephant manure. "You are choosing poverty, Natalia," he had said, his voice devoid of anger but heavy with disappointment. "You are choosing to be irrelevant." From that day on, I became the black sheep, the cautionary tale whispered about at country clubs. Poor Natalia. She had so much potential before she decided to save the world. My pocket vibrated, shattering the peace of the music room. I ignored it at first, keeping my eyes on Leo's fingers as they hovered over the keys. But the buzzing was persistent, angry. I signaled for my assistant to take over and stepped into the hallway. It was Vanessa. "Finally," she snapped before I could even say hello. "I have been calling for 3 minutes. Listen, plans have changed. The housekeeper has a family emergency. So inconsiderate. Honestly, right before the gala. And we need someone to watch Bentley. He gets anxious when we are gone for too long." Bentley was their purebred Afghan hound, a dog that ate organic salmon and had better hair than I did. "I cannot do it, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Don't be ridiculous," she huffed. "I know you are still sulking about dinner. But let's be adults. We will pay you. Call it a consultation fee if that makes you feel better about your little degree. We need you there by 6. She assumed I was free. She assumed that my time had zero value unless they assigned a price tag to it. The sheer arrogance of it took the air out of my lungs for a second. "I am not sulking," I said, leaning against the cool brick wall of the hallway. "And I am not free. I told you. I have an event tonight." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Oh, right. The teacher thing. Natalia, be serious. Mom and Dad are going to be furious if we have to board Bentley at a kennel. He picks up fleas at those places. Just cancel your little sing-along." "No." "Excuse me?" I said no. "I am busy. Goodbye, Vanessa." I hung up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally drawing a line in the sand. 10 minutes later, my phone began to light up like a slot machine. The notification banner from the Whitfield Dynasty group chat scrolled endlessly. "Vanessa, I simply cannot believe the selfishness, after everything we do for her." Julian, "Seriously, Nat? It is just a dog. We have the biggest night of our careers and you cannot help out for 5 hours?" Then came the private messages. "My mother, we are very disappointed in your attitude. Natalia, family comes first. If you cannot support your brother on this important night, perhaps we should reconsider the monthly allowance we set aside for your emergency fund." I stared at the screen, a bitter smile touching my lips. They still thought they owned me. They thought the $200 they transferred into a dormant account I hadn't touched in 5 years was the leash that kept me obedient. I had been financially independent since the day I graduated, living off my salary and private tutoring, but they refused to acknowledge that reality because it diminished their control. I opened my banking app. The balance was modest, 4 figures, enough to pay rent and buy groceries, but not enough to buy a single handbag from Vanessa's closet. Then, I switched to my email. There it was, the confirmation from the National Arts Endowment. "Dear Ms. Whitfield, regarding your itinerary, as a guest of honor, all transportation and attire costs have been covered by the Foundation. You will be traveling via a secure motorcade. Please note that your accommodation and hospitality package is set to the Head of State Standard. Per the White House Protocol Office. Head of State Standard." The contrast was dizzying. On one side of the city, my family was likely screaming at tailors, fretting over cufflinks, and worrying about whether their champagne would be chilled to the exact right degree. They were preparing to beg for the attention of the elite. And here I was, sitting on the floor of a music room, worrying about whether my speech would adequately convey the brilliance of children like Leo to a nation that often ignored them. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to be heard. "Ms. Whitfield?" I looked up. Standing at the door was Eleanor. Leo's grandmother. She was a small woman, always dressed in oversized gray cardigans that smelled of lavender. She raised Leo alone on a pension that I suspected was razor thin. "I heard you are going to a big fancy party tonight," she said softly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Something like that. Eleanor," I said, standing up and brushing the dust off my slacks. "Just a work function." "Well," she stepped forward, her hands cupped around something small. "You can't go to a big party without a little sparkle. The kids, they talk about you, in their own way. You give them a voice. I wanted to give you this." She pressed a cold, hard object into my palm. I looked down. It was a brooch. It looked ancient, shaped like a phoenix with spread wings. The metal was dark, perhaps tarnished silver, and it was set with stones that looked like dull glass. It was heavy, much heavier than it looked. "Eleanor, I cannot take this," I started. "Hush," she smiled, closing my fingers over the piece. "It was mine a long time ago. It has seen a lot of history. That pin, it brings the truth to light. Wear it for luck. Just promise me you will wear it high up, where everyone can see." I looked at the old, slightly battered piece of jewelry. It was the complete opposite of the diamonds Vanessa would be renting for the night. It was real. It had a story. "I will," I whispered, pinning it to my blouse to keep it safe. "I will wear it right over my heart." As Eleanor walked Leo out to the parking lot, I touched the brooch. It felt warm against my skin. I did not know it then, but that heavy, dull piece of metal was about to start a war. 48 hours before the night that would dismantle my family's reality. A silence fell over my narrow street that felt heavy and electric. My apartment complex is not the sort of place that attracts attention. It is a place of faded brick facades and rusted fire escapes, where the most exciting vehicle to pass by is usually the postal truck. So, when a phantom black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the curb, occupying the space of 2 compact cars, the entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. I was grading journals at my kitchen counter when the buzzer rang. It was not the jagged buzz of a delivery driver, but a long, polite sustain. When I went down to the lobby, a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit was waiting for me. He introduced himself as the personal attaché to Mr. Arthur Sterling. The name hit me with the force of a physical blow. Arthur Sterling was not just a billionaire, he was an institution. He was the elusive patron of the arts whom Vanessa had been chasing for 5 years. She had sent him gift baskets, handwritten notes on vellum, and desperate emails begging for a 15-minute interview for her magazine. He had never once responded, and now his car was idling in front of my building, and his driver was holding the door open for me. The drive was silent and smooth, the city outside the tinted windows blurring into a stream of gray and neon. We arrived not at a corporate tower, but at a sprawling limestone estate tucked away behind iron gates in the Upper East Side, a place that smelled of old books and older money. I was led into a library that was larger than my entire apartment. Sitting by the fireplace, nursing a cup of tea, was a man I recognized from the few grainy paparazzi photos that existed of him. Arthur Sterling looked up, his eyes sharp and kind. "Natalia," he said, standing up to shake my hand. His grip was firm. "Thank you for coming. I imagine you are confused." "That is an understatement, sir," I replied. "I thought I was just receiving an award for music therapy." Arthur smiled, gesturing for me to sit. But you are not receiving it because a committee pulled your name out of a hat. You are receiving it because I nominated you." I stared at him. "You? But we have never met." "We have," he corrected gently. "I have sat in the back of your classroom 3 times this semester. My grandson, Henry, joined your program 6 months ago. He is the boy who insists on sitting under the piano while you play." My hand flew to my mouth. Henry, the quiet boy who would only calm down when I played Debussy. I had seen an older man in the observation room a few times, usually wearing a flat cap and a nondescript coat, but I had assumed he was just another worried relative, not one of the wealthiest men in America. "I have watched you," Natalia. Arthur continued, his voice serious. I have watched you treat those children with a dignity that the rest of the world denies them. You do not just teach them music, you give them a language, and that is why I decided that this year, the National Gala would be built around you. The National Gala? I asked, feeling a cold sweat prickle on my neck. The invitation said it was an award ceremony. Arthur chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. That was to ensure you did not panic and decline. Natalia, listen to me closely. This is not a school assembly. This is the National Fundraising Gala. It is being broadcast live on 50 television channels. The Vice President of the United States will be presenting your award. There will be members of the British royal family in the front row. We are aiming to raise $200 million for special needs education in a single night. The room seemed to spin. I gripped the armrests of the leather chair. 200 million? I do not have a dress for that. I do not have anything for that. We have taken care of the details, Arthur said, dismissing my panic with a wave of his hand. Then, his gaze dropped to my chest. He squinted, leaning forward. That brooch, may I ask where you got it? I touched the heavy, tarnished phoenix pinned to my blouse. Oh, this. The grandmother of one of my students gave it to me. Her name is Eleanor. She told me to wear it for luck. Arthur's eyes widened, and for the first time, the composed billionaire looked genuinely stunned. He sat back, shaking his head in disbelief. Eleanor, of course. I should have known she would spot a kindred spirit. You know her? Natalia, Arthur said softly, the woman you call Eleanor is Eleanor Valois. She was the head designer for the House of Romanov before the revolution of fashion in the 60s. She has been in hiding from the public eye for 3 decades. That brooch? He pointed a trembling finger at it. That is the Fire of St. Petersburg. It was commissioned for a duchess in 1955. It is not costume jewelry. It is worth more than the entire real estate portfolio your parents own. I looked down at the dull metal, suddenly terrified to touch it. I had been walking around with a fortune on my chest, given to me by a woman in a gray cardigan who clipped coupons. She gave it to you because she believes in you, Arthur said. And so do I. Now, come, we have work to do. The next 4 hours were a blur of sensory overload. I was not taken to a department store. I was taken to a private atelier where a team of seamstresses was waiting. They did not speak English. They spoke French, and the universal language of pins and fabric. The dress they brought out was not hanging on a rack. It was draped over a mannequin like a work of art. It was a midnight blue velvet gown, hand-embroidered with thousands of tiny, light-refracting crystals that looked like a star map. It had been designed specifically for me, commissioned by the foundation. As they adjusted the hem, my phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out, feeling a strange disconnect from the device. It was an Instagram notification. Vanessa had just posted a photo. She was standing in front of a mirror in her bedroom, wearing a bright red dress that screamed for attention. I recognized the brand. It was a high-end designer label, but it was from their ready-to-wear collection, available in any luxury mall for $8,000. She looked smug. The caption read, "Fitting for the night of the year, preparing to dine with the elite, while some people play dress-up in their little school plays. Sad, really. Hashtag Manhattan Elite. Hashtag Winner Circle. Hashtag sorry, not sorry." I felt a surge of old anger, the familiar sting of her mockery. I wanted to reply. I wanted to tell her that while she was wearing a dress thousands of other women could buy, I was wearing a piece of history. I wanted to tell her that the man she was dying to meet was currently sitting in the next room, eating a turkey sandwich and waiting for me. But Arthur appeared in the doorway of the fitting room. He saw the look on my face. He saw the phone in my hand. "Put it away," he said gently. She is mocking me," I said, my voice trembling. "She thinks I am nothing." Arthur walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. He looked at my reflection in the 3-way mirror, the midnight blue gown, the priceless phoenix brooch, the transformation from the lowly teacher to something ethereal. "Let her talk," Arthur said. his voice low and steely. "Let them all talk. They are fighting for scraps at a table they paid to sit at. You are the guest of honor at the table they cannot even see." He turned to me, so I faced him directly. "Listen to me, Natalia. The best revenge is not to argue with them. It is not to scream or to fight or to explain yourself. The best revenge is to let them wake up, turn on their televisions, and see you shining in a place so high above them that they realize they never really knew you at all." I took a deep breath, looking at the woman in the mirror. He was right. I put the phone away. I did not block Vanessa. I did not reply. I simply let the silence grow, knowing that in 48 hours, the silence would be broken by the sound of the entire world applauding. The morning of the gala arrived not with the gentle light of dawn, but with the aggressive roar of hairdryers and the clinking of champagne flutes at the Whitfield estate. Although I was not there to witness it personally, the relentless barrage of notifications on my phone painted a vivid picture of the hysteria. My family had transformed their home into a staging ground for a military operation, except the ammunition was hairspray and the objective was social climbing. According to the group chat, which I had silenced but not yet left, Vanessa had hired a team of 3 makeup artists and a stylist who allegedly worked with minor European royalty. The messages were a stream of consciousness centered entirely on their own magnificence. Vanessa: "The stylist says this shade of crimson is too aggressive for a commoner, but perfect for a woman of my stature. I feel like a queen." Mom: "You look breathtaking. Darling, much better than wasting a Saturday night in a dusty school auditorium like some people we know." They could not resist the jab, even in their moment of perceived triumph. They had to ensure I knew my place. Vanessa was on the phone with her friends, her voice shrill enough that I could imagine it echoing off the marble floors. I could picture her pacing the living room, clutching a glass of mimosa, spinning her web of lies. "Oh, absolutely," she was telling anyone who would listen. "We are expecting to have a private audience with Arthur Sterling. Yes, that Arthur Sterling. He has been dodging the press for years, but my sources say he is very interested in the editorial direction of my magazine. I expect we will be sharing a drink by 10 o'clock. It was a fabrication so bold, it was almost impressive. She had never met the man. She had never even received a rejection email from his secretary. She was banking on the chaos of the party to hide the fact that she would never get within 100 feet of him. While they were drowning in vanity, my morning was unfolding with a terrifying precision. At 9 o'clock sharp, my buzzer did not ring. Instead, there was a firm, rhythmic knock at my door. When I opened it, I was not greeted by a taxi driver, but by a team of 4 men in dark suits with earpieces coiling down their necks. They were not private security. They carried the distinct, heavy presence of federal agents. "Ms. Whitfield," the lead agent said, nodding respectfully. "We have secured the perimeter. The motorcade is waiting. We need to move now to stay ahead of the traffic closures for the vice president." I grabbed my small clutch, my hands trembling slightly. I checked my reflection one last time. The midnight blue velvet, the ancient phoenix brooch burning on my chest, and stepped out. As I was descending the stairs, flanked by men who looked ready to take a bullet for me, my phone rang. It was Julian. For a foolish second, a tiny, hopeful part of my heart sparked to life. I thought that perhaps, despite everything, my brother was calling to wish me luck. I thought maybe he remembered that before the money and the wife and the ambition. He used to be the one who drove me to my piano recitals. I answered. "Hello, Julian?" "Natalia. Thank God." His voice was breathless, but not with emotion. It was the stress of logistics. "Listen, we have a situation. Vanessa's dress is too voluminous for the sedan, so we are taking the SUV. Dad is taking the limousine with Mom. The problem is, we sent the staff home early to get ready, but we forgot the housekeeper needs to go to the market to prepare for tomorrow's brunch." I stopped walking. The agent in front of me paused, looking back with concern. "You want... what, Julian?" "We need your car," he said, his tone impatient. "The keys are under your mat, right? I am sending an Uber to pick them up. The housekeeper can drive your Honda. It is not like you are using it to go to your little school thing, right? You probably took the bus. The spark in my heart died, instantly and completely, leaving behind a cold pile of ash. My car is not available. Julian, I said, my voice eerily calm. What? Why? Look, don't be petty, Nat. It is just a Honda. We are talking about the Elite Gala here. We cannot have the housekeeper stranded. I am using it. I lied. I wasn't using it. Of course. I was about to step into a bulletproof vehicle, but he didn't deserve to know that. Using it? For what? Parking at the high school is free. Just leave it. Goodbye, Julian. Enjoy your night. I ended the call and turned the phone off completely. I handed it to the agent next to me. Please hold this. I do not want to hear it ring again tonight. We arrived at the Lincoln Center 40 minutes later. The scene was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The streets were blocked off for 3 blocks in every direction. Police barricades held back a sea of onlookers. When our car approached the checkpoint, bomb-sniffing dogs circled the vehicle, and men with mirrors checked the undercarriage. This was not a party. It was a fortress protecting the most powerful people in the nation. In stark contrast, across town, the Whitfield family was arriving at the Manhattan Elite Gala. From what I would later learn, the venue was a hotel ballroom that had seen better days. The event was organized by a promoter known for selling overpriced tickets to the nouveau riche, people who had money but no connections, people who were desperate to be seen. The carpet was red, but it was thin and taped down at the corners. The photographers flashing their cameras were mostly freelancers hired by the event organizers to make the guests feel important. There were no senators, there were no tech moguls, just a room full of real estate agents, minor influencers, and people like my family, all preening like peacocks in a cage, convinced they were in the jungle. Vanessa, of course, was live-streaming the moment she stepped out of the car. She held her phone high, using a filter that smoothed her skin and made the hotel lobby look more golden than it actually was. "Hey guys," she cooed into the camera, waving at her imaginary audience. "Just arrived at the most exclusive event in America. The energy here is insane. So many VIPs. I can't show you everything because, privacy is paramount for the billionaire class. But trust me, tonight is going to be legendary." She spun the camera around, catching my parents looking stiff and uncomfortable, and Julian adjusting his tie, looking around the room with a desperate hope that he would recognize someone famous. He wouldn't. The most famous person there was a reality TV star who had been irrelevant for 5 years. Meanwhile, I was being ushered through a private side entrance at the Lincoln Center. The hallway was lined with fresh white roses. The air smelled of expensive perfume and anticipation. I was guided to the green room, a plush lounge reserved for the night's performers and key speakers. I walked in and froze. Sitting on a velvet sofa, tuning a cello, was Yo-Yo Ma. Standing by the catering table, sipping tea, was a pianist I had worshipped since I was 5 years old. A woman whose recordings I had memorized note for note. I felt like an imposter. I wanted to turn around and run back to the safety of my classroom. But then, the pianist looked up. She set her tea down and walked straight toward me. "Natalia Whitfield," she said, her voice warm and melodious. I blinked, stunned. You know who I am?" "We all do," she smiled, and the room seemed to quiet down as other artists turned to look. "Arthur showed us the video of you working with the children, the way you use resonance to bridge the neurological gap. It is revolutionary. We play music, my dear. You use it." She reached out and took my hands. Her hands, insured for millions of dollars, were holding mine, the rough, chalk-dusted hands of a schoolteacher. "Tonight is not about us," she whispered conspiratorially. "We are just the opening act. Tonight is about you." For the first time all day, the knot of anxiety in my chest began to loosen. I realized that while my family was across town, drowning in a sea of fake gold and empty promises, I was standing on solid ground. I was exactly where I was meant to be, and the show hadn't even started yet. While I was standing in a room that smelled of white roses and quiet genius, across the city, the Whitfield dynasty was holding court at Table 9 of the Manhattan Elite Gala. I was not there to witness it personally, but the events of that dinner were recounted to me later with such precise, excruciating detail by the man who sat across from them that I feel as if I watched it unfold in real time. The gala was held in a ballroom that tried too hard. The chandeliers were too big. The music was too loud, and the guests were too eager. It was a room full of people who measured their self-worth by the size of the logos on their handbags. My family, naturally, felt right at home. They were seated at a round table near the front, sharing the space with a loud real estate developer from Florida and a man named Marcus. Marcus was the anomaly. While the other men at the table wore watches the size of hockey pucks and suits that shimmered under the stage lights, Marcus wore a simple, matte black suit. He spoke little, drank water instead of the cheap champagne being passed around as vintage, and observed the room with the detached amusement of a scientist watching lab rats. The conversation, as it always did with my family, turned to status, specifically, the status of those they considered beneath them. It is hard to find good help these days, Vanessa sighed, swirling her glass. She had already consumed 3 glasses of wine, and her voice was carrying across the table, sharp and brittle. We have a housekeeper who thinks she is part of the family, and a sister-in-law who thinks she is Mother Teresa. The Florida developer laughed, slapping the table. Sister-in-law? The one who isn't here? The very same, Julian chimed in, adjusting his cufflinks to ensure the gold caught the light. Natalia, we tried to get her to come tonight. We even offered to pay for her ticket, which, mind you, was $5,000 a seat. But she insisted on going to some community award ceremony. She prefers the company of charity cases. It is embarrassing, truly, my mother added, shaking her head as she picked at her salmon. We gave her every opportunity, private schools, tutors, connections to the top law firms in the city, and she chose to teach. She barely makes $40,000 a year. It is not even enough to cover her maintenance, let alone build a future. She has no ambition, my father grunted. Some people are born to lead, and some are born to serve. Natalia is, well, she is happy being a servant to the system. It is a shame, really, a waste of the Whitfield name. Vanessa giggled, leaning in as if sharing a scandalous secret. She actually showed us her invitation. It was for some cultural ambassador award. I told her, Natalia, honey, that is just a plastic trophy they give to teachers so they don't feel bad about being poor. She was so offended, but honestly, someone had to tell her. We are here rubbing shoulders with the titans of industry, and she is probably eating lukewarm chicken in a school cafeteria right now. The table erupted in laughter. They laughed at my salary. They laughed at my students. They laughed at the idea that my work had any value beyond keeping defectives out of sight. It was then that Marcus spoke. His voice was low, baritone, and commanded instant silence despite its lack of volume. I apologize, Marcus said, setting his water glass down with a soft clink. Did you say her name is Natalia? Natalia Whitfield? Vanessa blinked, surprised that the quiet man was addressing her. Yes. Why? Do not tell me you know her. If she owes you money, I am afraid you will have to get in line. I do not know her personally, Marcus said, his face unreadable. But I follow the arts. Is she a pianist? Does she work with neurodivergent children? Vanessa rolled her eyes, a gesture so exaggerated it nearly knocked her earrings loose. Oh, please, do not make it sound so fancy. She plays nursery rhymes for slow children. It is basically glorified babysitting for kids who cannot talk. It is tragic, really, but someone has to wipe their noses, I suppose. A shadow passed over Marcus's face. It was a tightening of the jaw, a slight narrowing of the eyes that went completely unnoticed by my family, who were too busy congratulating themselves on their wit. I see, Marcus said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a smartphone. He did not unlock it immediately. He just held it, tapping his thumb against the black screen. You seem very certain of your position here tonight, Mrs. Whitfield. Call me Vanessa, she beamed, mistaking his scrutiny for admiration. And of course I'm certain. We are the VIPs. In fact, I have it on good authority that Arthur Sterling will be joining our table later. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Arthur Sterling? The recluse? The billionaire, Vanessa corrected. He is looking for a new media partner. My magazine is the obvious choice. I have been coordinating with his team for weeks. He is very eager to meet me. I expect he will be here within the hour. I might even let him buy me a drink. Is that so? Marcus asked. He unlocked his phone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, checking a schedule, then an email, then a live feed. You seem skeptical, Julian said, his tone defensive. My wife is a very influential woman in the New York media. I do not doubt her influence, Marcus said, his eyes still on his screen. I am just confused about her geography. Geography? Vanessa frowned. What are you talking about? Marcus looked up. A small, enigmatic smile played on his lips. It was the smile of a predator who has just realized the prey is already caught in the trap. I heard a rumor, Marcus said softly, leaning forward so that only their table could hear. I heard that Arthur Sterling is not doing a meet and greet tonight. I heard he is currently at the Lincoln Center. And I heard he is there to honor a woman who, as you put it, plays nursery rhymes for slow children. Vanessa scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Fake news. You cannot trust everything you read on the internet. Marcus, Arthur Sterling would not be caught dead at a teachers' convention. He is a businessman. He goes where the money is, and the money is right here. Are you sure about that? Marcus asked. Because my sources are usually quite reliable. 100%, Vanessa declared, lifting her chin. Arthur Sterling will walk through those doors any minute now, and he will come straight to me, and when he does, you will see exactly why I'm sitting at this table, and Natalia is sitting in a high school gym. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then, he slowly put his phone back in his pocket. Very well, he said. Let us wait and see. The night is young. Vanessa, and I have a feeling the truth is about to be very illuminating. My family went back to their drinks, smug and secure in their delusion. They did not notice that Marcus had stopped eating. They did not notice that he was watching the large projection screens mounted on the ballroom walls, screens that were currently playing advertisements, but were scheduled to switch to the national broadcast in exactly 10 minutes. They did not know that the clock was ticking down not to their triumph, but to their absolute televised destruction. The hushed atmosphere inside the Lincoln Center was not merely quiet. It was a physical weight, a heavy blanket of anticipation woven from the collective breath of 3,000 of the most powerful people on the planet. From the wings of the stage, I watched the audience. It was a sea of tuxedos and couture gowns, a gathering that included the Vice President of the United States, members of the British royal family, and captains of industry whose decisions moved markets. But tonight, they were not there to legislate or trade. They were there to listen. The house lights dimmed, plunging the massive auditorium into darkness. A single, focused beam of pure white light cut through the blackness, illuminating the Steinway grand piano that sat alone at the center of the stage. It looked lonely, yet defiant, a black island in a sea of shadow. A voice boomed over the speakers, rich and familiar. It belonged to an Academy Award-winning actress, known for her humanitarian work. She walked to the podium. Her silhouette commanded attention. Tonight, she began, her voice echoing with theatrical gravity. We honor those who find language where there are no words. We honor the bridge builders who cross the silent chasms of the human mind. Please welcome the National Cultural Ambassador of Faith, a woman who uses music to heal the souls that medicine has abandoned, Ms. Natalia Whitfield. My cue. I stepped out of the shadows and into the light. The moment the spotlight hit me, I heard a collective gasp ripple through the front rows. I was no longer the woman in the sensible cardigan who bought groceries with coupons. I was draped in the midnight blue velvet gown Arthur had commissioned. The thousands of crystals hand-stitched into the fabric caught the intense stage light. making me look as though I were wearing a piece of the night sky itself. But the true star was the brooch, the fire of Saint. Petersburg, pinned high on my shoulder, blazed with a fierce, ancient energy, its dull metal suddenly alive, refracting the light into a prism of history and power. I walked toward the piano. My legs did not shake. My heart did not race. A strange, icy calm had settled over me. I was not walking toward judgment. I was walking toward my truth. I sat on the bench, arranging the heavy velvet of my train, and placed my hands on the keys. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I was not in a concert hall. I was back in the small, dusty practice room with Leo. I thought of his silence. I thought of the frustration in his eyes when the world failed to understand him. I thought of the millions of people like him, dismissed and discarded by people like my family. I began to play. The piece was my own composition, titled The Unspoken. It began with a single, high note, repeated rhythmically like a hesitant heartbeat. Then, the left hand entered, a dark, rolling arpeggio that sounded like deep water. The melody was simple at first, fragile and searching. But it grew. It swelled into a complex, stormy conversation between the two hands, a struggle between silence and expression. I poured everything into the instrument, the rejection from my parents, the sneers from Vanessa, the years of being told I was nothing. I turned that pain into a crescendo that shook the floorboards. The acoustics of the hall were perfect, carrying every nuance, every ghost of a note to the very last row of the balcony. The audience did not move. They did not cough. It was as if the music had cast a spell. Freezing time itself, I was playing with their secrets, their fears, and their hopes. I was stripping away their titles and their wealth until they were just humans, listening to the raw sound of a soul breaking open. Meanwhile, across the city at the Manhattan Elite Gala, the atmosphere was rapidly decomposing from festive to tedious. The dinner had been served, a lukewarm breast of chicken with rubbery skin and a side of asparagus that had seen better days. The conversation at table 9 had stalled. Vanessa had exhausted her repertoire of humble brags and was now frantically refreshing her email, waiting for the message from Arthur Sterling's team that would never come. The room was filled with the low murmur of bored guests. The event organizers, realizing that the energy was dipping, decided to deploy their main attraction. They had advertised a live simulcast of the national event of the year as a way to make their ticket holders feel connected to the broader cultural moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced over the crackling sound system, "please turn your attention to the main screens. We are now joining the National Fundraising Gala live from the Lincoln Center." The massive projection screens on the walls, which had previously been cycling through logos of local car dealerships, flickered to life. The feed was crystal clear, broadcast in high definition. Vanessa did not look up. She was busy tilting her chin down and to the left, perfecting her pout for a selfie. She adjusted the lighting ring attached to her phone case, completely absorbed in the digital reflection of her own vanity. "Just waiting for Arthur," she typed into the caption box. "Any minute now." My father, however, was bored. He had been picking at his food, wondering if he could leave early without losing face, when the screens changed. The sudden shift in light caught his eye. He looked up, squinting through his bifocals at the giant image looming over the ballroom. The camera work was exquisite. It was a slow, cinematic zoom, focusing on the pianist's hands flying across the keys with impossible speed and grace. Then, the camera panned up. It moved past the hands, past the wrists, up the arms, and settled on the profile of the performer. The lighting was dramatic, casting half my face in shadow, but the profile was unmistakable. The camera lingered on the phoenix brooch, which was glinting violently under the stage lights, before pulling back to reveal my full face as I threw my head back in the climax of the piece. My father's hand froze mid-air. The fork he was holding, loaded with a piece of dry chicken, slipped from his fingers. It hit the fine china plate with a sharp, piercing clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the lull of conversation. "Robert?" my mother asked, annoyed by the noise. "What is wrong with you?" My father did not answer. His mouth hung slightly open. his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the screen. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "That," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "That is—" "What is it?" Julian asked, looking up from his own phone, annoyed. "Is it the president?" "No," my father choked out, the blood draining from his face until he was as pale as the tablecloth. "That is Natalia." The image on the massive projection wall at the Manhattan Elite Gala was so crisp that every individual crystal on my dress seemed to vibrate with its own light. The camera work was predatory in its intimacy, lingering on the sweat glistening on my brow and the raw, unmasked emotion in my eyes. But it was the text scrolling across the bottom of the screen in bold. Authoritative white letters that acted as the final nail in the coffin of my family's delusions. Live, Natalia Whitfield, Cultural Ambassador of the Year, performing world premiere of The Soundless Echo at the Royal Gala. The ballroom, previously filled with the clatter of silverware and the dull hum of networking, fell into a hush that was almost violent. It started as a ripple. One person at a table near the back pointed, then another, then, like a wave crashing against a shore, the entire room turned their heads. 300 necks craned upward, abandoning their conversations to stare at the woman who was supposedly, at this very moment, sitting in a dusty apartment grading papers. At table 9, the silence was deafening. My father was still freezing, his finger pointing accusingly at the screen. My mother had stopped chewing, her napkin pressed to her lips as if she were about to be sick, but it was Vanessa whose reaction was the most visceral. The color did not just drain from her face, it seemed to evaporate, leaving her skin the sickly shade of old parchment. She blinked rapidly, her mind frantically trying to reject the visual evidence before her. Her brain, wired for manipulation and spin, could not process a reality where I was winning. "No," Vanessa stammered, her voice high and thin, cracking under the strain. She stood up, her chair legs screeching against the floor. "That is impossible. That is a trick." She looked around the table, her eyes wide and manic, begging for validation. "It is a deep fake," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "You guys know about this, right? It is AI. Someone hacked the feed. Natalia is at home. I tracked her phone location earlier. She is at home. This is just some digital filter." "Vanessa," Julian whispered. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the screen, his mouth hanging open in a way that was entirely undignified for a high-powered attorney. "Look at the graphics!" Vanessa shrieked, growing more desperate as the camera on the screen cut to a wide shot of the Lincoln Center audience, showing the rows of dignitaries. "It is all computer-generated. Look at those people. They aren't real. Natalia doesn't know the vice president. She doesn't own a dress like that." "The brooch," Julian murmured, ignoring his wife's hysteria. He leaned forward, squinting at the giant monitor. "My God, Vanessa, look at the brooch." "Who cares about the stupid jewelry?" Vanessa snapped. "I do," Julian said, his voice trembling. "I saw that piece in a catalog for the Romanoff exhibition at the Met 10 years ago. It was listed as lost to history. It is not a prop. Ness, the way the light hits the center stone, you cannot fake that refraction. That is the fire of St. Petersburg." Around them, the whispers of the other guests were becoming audible. The nouveau riche crowd, sensitive to the shifting winds of power, smelled blood. They began to look at the Whitfield table not with envy, but with confusion and derision. "Hey," the Florida developer at their table said, pointing his fork at the screen. "Isn't that the lowly teacher you were making fun of 5 minutes ago? She looks pretty important to me." "It is a prank!" Vanessa yelled, slamming her hand on the table, causing the wine glasses to jump. "It is a sick joke!" On the screen, the final chord of my song struck. I held the note, my hands hovering over the keys, my chest heaving. For a second, there was total silence in the Lincoln Center broadcast. Then, the explosion happened. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar. The camera cut to the audience, and every single person in the 3,000-seat auditorium was on their feet. The sound was a physical force, a thunderclap of approval that seemed to shake the speakers in the Elite Gala ballroom. "Look," Marcus said quietly from his seat. On screen. A figure walked onto the stage from the left. It was a woman with silver hair and a familiar, authoritative stride. "That is the Vice President," the developer gasped. The Vice President of the United States walked up to the piano. I stood up on the screen, looking small next to the instrument but standing tall in my velvet gown. The Vice President didn't just shake my hand. She pulled me into an embrace. She leaned into the microphone, her voice booming through the broadcast. "For giving a voice to the voiceless," she said, handing me a crystal trophy that was nearly half the size of my torso. "The nation thanks you. Natalia." Vanessa dropped her phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. Screen side down. Forgotten. She slumped back into her chair, her mouth moving wordlessly. The narrative she had built, the story of her success and my failure, was dissolving in real time, broadcast to the entire world. But the final blow was yet to come. On the screen, the Vice President stepped back, gesturing to the wings of the stage. "And now," the announcer's voice returned, "to present the endowment check, please welcome the chairman of the foundation, Mr. Arthur Sterling." The air left the lungs of everyone at Table 9. Arthur Sterling walked out. He was not in a private meeting with Vanessa. He was not on his way to the Elite Gala. He was wearing a white tie and tails, looking every inch the billionaire patriarch. He walked straight to me. He didn't just stand next to me. He took my hand in his. He raised our joined hands high in the air, a gesture of absolute solidarity. Then, in a moment that would be gifted and shared on social media millions of times within the hour, the great Arthur Sterling turned to me and bowed. It was a deep, respectful bow, the kind a subject offers a queen. He is bowing to her," my mother whispered, clutching her pearls. "Arthur Sterling is bowing to my daughter." "He was supposed to be here," Vanessa whispered, tears of rage and humiliation welling in her eyes. "He was supposed to come see me." Marcus, who had been watching the screen with a satisfied expression, finally turned back to Vanessa. "It appears," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise of the applause, "that Mr. Sterling has found better company, and frankly, Vanessa, looking at that screen, I cannot say I blame him." The camera zoomed in one last time on my face, flushed with victory, standing hand in hand with the man Vanessa had spent her career trying to chase. I looked radiant. I looked powerful. And most importantly to the people sitting at Table 9, I looked completely and utterly out of their reach. The applause in the Lincoln Center was a physical embrace, warm and overwhelming, but across the city at the Manhattan Elite Gala, the atmosphere had turned into a cold, jagged cage. I was not there to see the color drain from my brother's face, or to hear the glass shatter in my mother's grip, but the footage that surfaced later, filmed by the very people Vanessa had tried to impress, painted a portrait of humiliation so vivid it almost evoked pity. Almost. At Table 9, the silence that had followed my appearance on the screen was broken by the sound of a chair scraping violently against the floor. It was Marcus, the quiet man in the black suit, whom Vanessa had dismissed as a nobody, stood up. He did not look at the screen anymore. He looked down at my family with an expression of clinical disdain. He raised his voice, pitching it perfectly so that it cut through the murmurs of the surrounding tables. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his tone dripping with a mock confusion that was sharper than any blade. "I am trying to reconcile something. Is that not Natalia Whitfield on the screen? The same woman you just described to this entire table as a lowly teacher who wastes her time with slow children?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "Because from where I am standing," Marcus continued, gesturing grandly toward the giant projection where Arthur Sterling was currently bowing to me, "it looks like she is the guest of honor at the Royal Gala, and you are sitting here, eating cold chicken at a hotel ballroom, lying about knowing a man who clearly has better places to be. The impact was immediate. The wealthy developer from Florida, the one Vanessa had been flirting with earlier to secure an ad deal, let out a loud, barking laugh. "Damn," he said, shaking his head. "He got you there, Vanessa. You said she was playing at a school talent show. That looks like the vice president to me." I didn't know," Julian stammered, his face flushing a deep, beet red. He loosened his tie, looking like he was suffocating. "She didn't tell us the scale. She lied by omission." "She gave you the invitation," Marcus corrected coldly. "You just didn't bother to read it because you were too busy admiring your own reflection." The circle of humiliation began to widen. People at the neighboring tables, who had been listening to Vanessa brag all night, turned their chairs around. I was told later that the looks they gave my family were not of anger, but of something far worse: amusement. My family had become the entertainment. They were the punchline of a joke they hadn't realized was being told. "Hey," a woman in a sequined dress called out from 2 tables away. "Aren't you the one who said Arthur Sterling was coming to have a drink with you? Looks like he is busy holding your sister-in-law's hand." Laughter rippled through the section. It was the sound of social capital evaporating. Then the technology turned against her. Vanessa's phone, which was still lying face down on the carpet where she had dropped it, began to vibrate. It wasn't a gentle buzz. It was a continuous, frantic convulsion. It buzzed so hard it skittered across the floor. She bent down to pick it up, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it again. The lock screen was a waterfall of notifications. Ping, ping, ping. It was Instagram. It was Twitter. It was the group chats of the fashion editors she worked with. Her rival at Vogue, a woman named Chloe who Vanessa had sabotaged for years, had tagged her in a story. The caption read, "Watching the National Gala. Is it just me? Or did Vanessa Whitfield swear her sister-in-law was a loser? This loser is wearing a custom piece that costs more than Vanessa's annual salary. Awkward. Hashtag karma. Hashtag Whitfield lies." Another notification from her boss. "Vanessa, why are you at that B-list hotel party when your family is the center of the biggest event in the country? You missed the story of the year. We need to talk on Monday." "Stop it!" Vanessa hissed at her phone, frantically trying to swipe the notifications away. But they kept coming. Strangers were finding her profile. Comments were flooding her last selfie. "Liar. Jealous. Your sister-in-law is a queen and you are a clown." Meanwhile, on the giant screen looming over them, I had moved to the microphone. I adjusted the stand. I looked out at the audience in the Lincoln Center. But in my mind, I was speaking directly to the people sitting at table 9. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady and amplified across 50 channels. "Tonight is a celebration of value. For a long time, I was told that my work was insignificant." My father flinched as if I had slapped him. On the screen, my face was 10 feet tall, every word magnified. "I was told," I continued, looking straight into the camera lens, "that a person's worth is measured by their bank account, by the parties they attend, and by the designer labels they wear. I was told that teaching a child to find their voice was lowly work." The camera cut to a reaction shot of the audience in the Lincoln Center. A duchess in the front row was wiping a tear from her eye. The vice president was nodding solemnly. "But tonight," I said, my voice rising with emotion, "we prove that the greatest currency is not gold, but grace. The greatest ambition is not to rule, but to serve. To my students, who are watching this, you are the true elite. You are the royalty of the human spirit." The applause that followed was deafening. Back at the Elite Gala, the contrast was brutal. My words hung in the air, stripping my family of their last defenses. Vanessa, in a panic, unlocked her phone. She needed to fix this. She needed to attach herself to my rising star before it was too late. Her thumbs flew across the keyboard. "Natalia, OMG, I am crying. I am so proud of you. We are all watching. Mention us in the next interview. Love you so much." She hit send. For a second, the message bubbled in blue. Then, instantly, it turned green. And then, A small red exclamation point appeared next to it. Message not delivered. She tried again. Call me. Message not delivered. She opened Instagram to DM me. The profile wouldn't load. It just said, user not found. She blocked me, Vanessa whispered, the horror finally reaching her eyes. She blocked me. On everything. She blocked all of us, Julian said, staring at his own phone. I cannot even find her on Facebook. They were cut off. They were isolated. They were sinking. And I had taken the only life raft with me. Suddenly, a shadow fell over their table. It was not a waiter. It was the chairman of the Manhattan Elite Gala, a stout man with a red face who looked furious. He was flanked by 2 security guards. Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, the chairman spat, his voice low and angry. We are victims here, Vanessa shrieked, jumping up. Do you know who we are? That is my sister-in-law on the screen. I do not care who she is, the chairman snapped, but I care that you are ruining my event. Your table is making a scene. Guests are complaining about the shouting, the crying, and the negative energy. You are distracting people from the simulcast. We paid $5,000 for these seats, my father blustered, trying to summon his usual authority, but his voice cracked. And you are devaluing the experience for everyone else, the chairman said, signaling to the guards. You are embarrassing yourselves, and you are embarrassing this organization. I am going to have to ask you to lower your voices immediately, or I will have you escorted out. This is a black tie event, not a domestic dispute in a trailer park. The insult hit Vanessa like a physical blow. She, the queen of high society, is being compared to trash. She looked around for support, for someone to defend her, but the faces at the surrounding tables were cold. They had turned their backs. They were watching the screen, watching me shine, and ignoring the fading, desperate sparks of the people who had tried to burn me out. My family sat down, shrinking into their chairs. They were trapped. They couldn't leave without looking like they were fleeing in shame. And they couldn't stay without enduring the torture of watching my triumph on a 30-foot screen. They had to sit there, in the ruins of their ego. While the world celebrated the lowly teacher they had thrown away, the microphone felt cool against my palm, a grounding anchor in a sea of overwhelming light. Beside me, Arthur Sterling cleared his throat, a sound that amplified across the auditorium and, unbeknownst to me, reverberated like thunder through the speakers at the Manhattan Elite Gala. Talent is rare, Arthur said, his voice gravelly and rich with authority, but the courage to use that talent for the forgotten is even rarer. Tonight, the foundation does not just offer a trophy, we offer a future. I am proud to announce the launch of the Whitfield Initiative for Neurodivergent Arts. He paused, letting the name sink in. My name, not my father's real estate company, not my brother's law firm, but my name, attached to a legacy I had built with nothing but patience and piano keys. To kickstart this initiative, Arthur continued, reaching into his jacket pocket, I am personally endowing the fund with a starting grant of $10 million. The audience in the Lincoln Center gasped, but the reaction at Table 9 in the hotel ballroom was catastrophic. $10 million. My father's face went from pale to a terrifying shade of gray. In his world, money was the only language that mattered. He had spent a lifetime dismissing me because my teacher's salary was a rounding error in his ledger. Now, in a single sentence, I had been handed more capital than his business had generated in profit over the last 3 years. $10 million, the Florida developer at their table muttered, letting out a low whistle. And you guys said she was a charity case? She just became a walking IPO. Vanessa was trembling. It was a physical vibration that rattled the silverware. She looked like a cornered animal, her eyes darting around the table, looking for an exit, for a lie that could patch this sinking ship. It is probably tax write-offs, she stammered, her voice shrill and desperate. You know how these billionaires are. It is not real money. It is just paper moving around. I can explain this to Arthur when I interview him. He will understand that. Stop, Marcus said. It was a single word, spoken with the finality of a gavel striking wood. Vanessa flinched. She turned to glare at the quiet man in the black suit. "Excuse me? Do not tell me to stop. You do not know how this industry works. I am a senior editor. I control the narrative." Marcus slowly turned his head to face her. The amusement was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, corporate steeliness. "You control nothing, Vanessa," Marcus said evenly, "and you will certainly not be interviewing Arthur Sterling. Not tonight. Not ever." "And who are you to say that?" Vanessa spat, trying to summon her last reserves of arrogance. "Some random investor?" Marcus reached into his jacket pocket again, this time. He didn't pull out a phone. He pulled out a business card. It was thick, heavy stock, black with gold lettering. He slid it across the tablecloth until it rested right next to Vanessa's trembling hand. "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said. "I am the majority shareholder of Piper Media Group." Vanessa stopped breathing. Piper Media Group was the parent company that owned the magazine she worked for. She was staring at the man who effectively owned the building she walked into every morning. "I sit on the board of directors," Marcus continued, his voice calm and lethal. "I have been listening to you for 2 hours. Vanessa, I have listened to you lie about your connections. I have listened to you fabricate a relationship with Mr. Sterling, a man I have known for 20 years. But worst of all, I have listened to you degrade a woman who evidently possesses more grace in her little finger than you have in your entire body." "Mr. Thorne," Julian interjected, his voice cracking. "Please, my wife is just... She is passionate. It is just party talk. We can explain." Marcus ignored him. He kept his eyes locked on Vanessa. "Journalism, even in fashion, requires a baseline of integrity. You have none, and you clearly lack the vision to recognize value, even when it is sitting at your own dinner table. If you cannot see the worth of your own sister-in-law, how can I trust you to curate culture for our readers?" Vanessa's phone buzzed, a single, ominous vibration. "Check your email," Marcus said. Vanessa looked down. Her fingers were so slippery with sweat she could barely unlock the screen. She opened her inbox. The top email was from the editor-in-chief of her magazine. The subject line was, "Urgent, immediate suspension. You are suspended effective immediately, pending an ethics investigation." Marcus narrated the email she was reading, though he could not see the screen. "We do not employ liars. Vanessa, you can clear out your desk on Monday. Security will be waiting." Vanessa made a sound that was half sob, half choke. She slumped forward, her forehead hitting the tablecloth, the phone slipping from her grasp. Julian, realizing the ship was going down, tried to salvage his own reputation. He turned to the Florida developer, forcing a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "Look, business is business, right? My firm handles crisis management. If you need representation..." The developer recoiled, physically leaning his chair away from Julian. "Crisis management? Buddy, you just watched your sister get handed $10 million and you didn't even know she was in the building. You are blind. I don't do business with people who leave gold mines in their backyard to chase pennies." He stood up, grabbing his drink. "I am moving tables. The air here stinks of desperation." My parents sat in stunned silence. They were statues of regret. My father looked at the screen, then at Julian, the son he had poured all his resources into, the son who was now being shunned by his peers. Then he looked at Vanessa, the daughter-in-law he had bragged about, who was now sobbing into a napkin, unemployed and disgraced. They realized, with a crushing weight, that they had bet on the wrong horse. They had spent 30 years pruning a weed and trying to pave over a rose. On the massive screen, the ceremony was winding down, but the drama was not over. A reporter from a major national network had stepped onto the stage with a microphone. "Natalia?" the reporter asked, her voice amplified to fill both the concert hall and the hotel ballroom. "This is a historic night. You have the vice president here. You have Mr. Sterling. But I have to ask, is your family here tonight? Surely they must be bursting with pride to see you achieve this." The camera zoomed in on my face. I did not smile. I did not frown. I looked directly into the lens, And through the miracle of technology, I looked directly into the eyes of the people at Table 9. I saw them. I saw their greed, their judgment, and now, their pathetic regret. I took a breath. "My family is here," I said, my voice steady. I gestured to the front row, where my students were sitting with their parents, and to the balcony where the other teachers stood. The people who believed in me when I had nothing but a dream and a piano, they are all here. "And your biological family?" the reporter pressed gently. "The Whitfields?" I paused. I let the silence stretch for a heartbeat, just long enough for my mother to hold her breath, just long enough for Julian to hope for a reprieve. "Oh," I said, my tone light, as if recalling a trivial fact. "Them, no, they are not here." I looked straight at the camera, my eyes hard as diamonds. "They are attending a very important party at a hotel," I said. "They told me they had to be with the elite tonight. I wouldn't want to burden them with a lowly teacher's event." The audience laughed, a warm, supportive chuckle at the irony, but at the Manhattan Elite Gala, the silence was absolute. I had not screamed at them. I had not cursed them. I had simply told the truth, and in doing so, I had severed the last thread connecting us. I turned away from the camera, taking Arthur's arm, leaving them alone in the darkness they had created for themselves. The walk from the stage to the exit of the Lincoln Center felt like moving through a dreamscape. The adrenaline that had fueled my performance was beginning to ebb, replaced by a profound, settling calm. I was no longer the nervous woman who had stepped out of a Honda Civic hours earlier. I was the recipient of a national honor, the face of a $10 million initiative, and for the first time in my life, I felt entirely solid in my own skin. Arthur walked beside me, his presence a silent shield against the chaos that awaited us outside. "The press is going to be aggressive, Natalia," he warned gently as we approached the heavy glass doors. "Do you want to use the rear exit?" I paused, adjusting the phoenix brooch that sat heavy and warm over my heart. I thought about hiding. I thought about slipping away into the night, avoiding the spectacle. But then I thought about the years I had spent hiding in the back of family photos, hiding my true self, hiding my achievements to avoid bruising their fragile egos. "No," I said, lifting my chin. "The front door is fine. I am done hiding." The security team pushed the doors open, and the night air hit me, biting and cold, carrying the scent of city exhaust and impending snow. But instantly, the cold was driven back by a wall of heat and light. The flashes of 100 cameras went off simultaneously, a strobe light storm that turned the sidewalk into a blinding wash of white. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, shouts of my name, questions from reporters, the frenetic energy of a city that had found a new darling. I moved toward the waiting limousine, a sleek black beast that looked like a spacecraft compared to the taxi I usually took. A path had been cleared for me by the security detail, a red carpet of safety cutting through the throng. And that was when I saw them. They were not standing in the VIP waiting area, where the senators and the Duchess were waiting for their drivers. They were pressed up against the metal barricades, sandwiched between a group of tourists and a hot dog vendor. The Whitfield family. They looked like refugees from a sunken ship. My father's tuxedo was rumpled, his tie askew. My mother was shivering in her silk wrap, her face a mask of bewildered terror. Julian looked frantic, scanning the crowd with wild eyes, and Vanessa was a ruin. Her mascara had run, creating dark tracks down her cheeks, and that red dress she had been so proud of now looked cheap and garish under the harsh streetlights. They must have raced here the moment they were kicked out of their own party, desperate to attach themselves to the narrative before it sped away without them. When Julian saw me, his face lit up with a terrifying manic hope. He began to wave, his arm flailing above the heads of the crowd. "Natalia!" he screamed. His voice was raw, cracking with desperation. "Nat, over here! It is us! It is Julian!" The paparazzi, sensing a new angle, swiveled their lenses toward the commotion. They saw the family screaming at the new star, and the shutters began to click furiously. "Mom and Dad are here. Natalia!" Julian yelled again, trying to push past a security guard who shoved him back with practiced indifference. "Let us through. We are her family. We are with her." I reached the open door of the limousine. The interior looked warm and inviting, a leather cocoon of silence. I could have just gotten in. I could have closed the door and never looked back. It would have been the safer choice. But I needed them to know. I needed them to understand that the silence between us was not a pause. It was a period. I stopped. I turned slowly, facing the barricade. The crowd quieted down. Sensing the tension, even the photographers lowered their cameras slightly, waiting for the interaction. My family saw me stop, and their relief was palpable. They thought I was coming to rescue them. They thought I was going to wave the guards aside, invite them into the limo, and let them share in the glory they had mocked only hours before. "Natalia!" Vanessa shrieked, elbowing her way to the front of the barrier. She plastered a smile on her face that was more grimace than joy. "Oh, thank God. We were so worried. We came as fast as we could." I stood by the car door, one hand resting on the cool metal roof. I did not smile. I did not wave. I just looked at them. I looked at the people who had raised me to feel small so they could feel big. "We are so proud of you, honey," Vanessa continued, her voice high and trembling. "It was all just a big misunderstanding earlier. You know how stress gets to us. We love you. Tell them to let us in." "Natalia," my father called out, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. "Don't be childish. Get us out of this cold. We have things to discuss. That grant money needs to be managed properly." Of course, even now, shivering on the sidewalk, he was thinking about the money. I signaled to my driver. He stepped aside. I slid into the back seat of the limousine, the leather creaking softly. "No, Natalia! Wait!" Julian screamed, panicking, seizing him as he realized I wasn't opening the door for them. I pressed the button on the armrest. The tinted window lowered with a smooth electric hum. I stopped it when it was halfway down. I looked out at them one last time. They were only 10 feet away, but they felt like they were on the other side of a canyon. "Vanessa," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the sudden hush of the street, it carried perfectly. Yes, sweetie, I am here." Vanessa leaned over the barricade, her hands grasping the cold metal bars. "You were right," I said calmly. Vanessa blinked, confused but hopeful. "I was?" "Yes," I said. "I am just a lowly teacher." Her smile faltered. "And this car," I continued, my eyes sweeping over my father, my mother, and my brother, taking in their frantic, pathetic state, "is not for classy people like you." The realization hit them like a physical slap. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My father slumped against the barricade. Defeated, Julian just stared at me, the ghost of the brother he could have been fading from his eyes. I pressed the button. The window rolled up, sealing me in. "Go," I said to the driver. As the limousine pulled away, gliding smoothly into the New York traffic, I did not look back, but I could see the flashes of light reflecting off the rearview mirror. The paparazzi had turned their backs on the limousine. They were now swarming the Whitfield family, capturing every tear, every shout, every moment of their public meltdown. Tomorrow's headlines would not just be about my victory. They would be about the family that fell from grace while trying to crash it. I sat back against the seat. The city lights streaked outside, beautiful and blurry. I reached up and touched the brooch again. It was warm. A smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of vengeance. It wasn't malicious. It was the smile of someone who had finally put down a heavy suitcase after carrying it for 29 years. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the filtered air of the car. It tasted like the future. I was alone in the back seat, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't lonely. I was free. And as the car turned toward the avenue, disappearing into the river of lights, I knew that my real story was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been an emotional journey, and I hope Natalia's victory gave you the satisfaction you were looking for. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please comment down below with your country or city. so we can see how far our community reaches. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Scarlet Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help us push this story out to more people who need a little inspiration. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next video.